Somewhere on a predator-free island off the coast of New Zealand, there is a parrot alive today that could be 90 years old. 90. That means this bird might have hatched before World War II ended. It could have been alive when the first man walked on the moon, when the Berlin Wall came down, when the internet was invented, and it would still be going. Now picture the parrot you know. Bright, fast, darting between branches, screeching past your head at a bird feeder. Forget that bird. This one doesn't fly. It can't fly. It never could. Instead, picture something the size and weight of a small cat, 9 pounds of green and yellow feathers waddling across a forest floor like a tiny, overstuffed dinosaur, dragging its tail feathers behind it because they're worn down from years of scraping the ground. No sleek silhouette built for speed, no streamlined chest. Just a soft, round, almost owl-faced bird that looks like it was designed by someone who had only ever heard a parrot described to them. This is the kakapo, the world's heaviest parrot, possibly the longest living bird on the planet, and quite possibly the strangest evolutionary accident in the entire bird kingdom. How does a parrot, a member of one of the most agile aerial bird families on Earth, end up too heavy, too slow, and too out of shape to fly? And how does an animal built like this manage to outlive nearly every human being who will ever watch this video? The average human life expectancy right now is somewhere around 73 years. This bird can beat that. A wild parrot with a brain the size of a walnut that has never once flown in its entire life could genuinely outlive you. To understand that, we have to go back, not a few hundred years, not a few thousand. We have to go back 80 million years to a moment when an entire chunk of the planet broke off and drifted into total isolation and accidentally created the perfect conditions for a flightless parrot to exist. About 80 million years ago, a landmass broke away from the ancient supercontinent Gondwana and drifted into the South Pacific, completely alone. That landmass became New Zealand. And here's the detail that changes everything. When it broke away, it carried almost no land mammals with it. No wolves, no big cats, no foxes, no rats, nothing with 4 legs and a taste for meat walking around on the ground. For tens of millions of years, the only real predators in New Zealand were birds, eagles and falcons hunting by sight from above. On the ground, nothing. New Zealand became, quite literally, a land of birds, with no mammals to compete with and no mammals to run from. Other species on the islands made the exact same evolutionary bet the kakapo did. The kiwi gave up flight. The takahe gave up flight. An entire ecosystem of birds essentially looked around, realized nothing on the ground could touch them, and started walking instead of flying. Now think about what flight actually costs an animal. Flying is one of the most expensive things a body can do. It demands a massive, oversized chest muscle bolted onto a keel-shaped breastbone. It demands a body kept artificially light because every extra gram makes takeoff harder. It demands constant high-output energy just to stay airborne. If you don't have a predator chasing you from the ground, that entire cost stops making sense. Evolution doesn't reward effort. It rewards efficiency. And over millions of years, the ancestors of the kakapo essentially stopped paying the metabolic bill for an emergency exit they never used. So, the species changed. The flight muscles shrank down to almost nothing. Today, barely 3% of a kakapo's body weight is flight muscle, compared to the thick double slabs of muscle strapped to the chest of a pigeon or a falcon. The keel on its breastbone, the anchor point flight muscles need to attach to, basically disappeared. There was nothing left that needed lifting off the ground. And here's the part most people get backwards. They assume the kakapo just lost the ability to fly, the way you might lose a skill from not practicing. That's not really what happened. The kakapo traded flight for something else entirely: fat storage. Most birds can't afford extra body fat. It's dead weight in the air. But a kakapo doesn't need to fly, so it does something almost no other bird on Earth does. It eats, and it stores the surplus as fat, like a mammal preparing for winter. That's how you end up with a 9-pound parrot. It isn't malnourishment in reverse. It's a body finally allowed to relax after millions of years with nothing chasing it. This is also why the kakapo can survive on food that would barely sustain other birds. Tough leaves, bark, roots, the kind of low-quality forest browse a flying bird could never afford to eat, because flying demands fast, high-energy fuel. The kakapo doesn't have that problem. Its metabolism idles low, like an engine left running in neutral. It can wait out bad years. It can survive on almost nothing. Scientists call this combination of abundant food, zero predators, and relaxed energy demands island gigantism. And the kakapo may be one of the clearest examples of it in the entire animal kingdom. And, as we'll get to, that same slow-burning metabolism may be exactly why it can live so unbelievably long. For roughly 70 million years, this was a winning strategy. A parrot the size of a cat, completely flightless, with almost nothing on the entire landmass capable of killing it from the ground. It had one real enemy in the sky, a massive eagle since extinct, big enough to take down prey several times its own size. Against an eagle hunting by sight from above, the kakapo had a perfect defense. Freeze. Stay still. Let mottled green and yellow feathers melt into the forest floor, invisible to something hunting from the air. For tens of millions of years, that was enough. The kakapo had built itself the perfect body for the world it lived in. Then, humans showed up, and they brought passengers. So if the kakapo can't fly, how does it survive in a forest where the best food is 60, 70, 80 feet up in the canopy? The answer is one of the strangest pieces of body mechanics in the entire bird world. The kakapo climbs, and it climbs astonishingly well for an animal that can't fly a single inch. Using its powerful legs and oversized, scaly feet, built less like a typical bird's and more like a pair of grappling hooks, it hauls its entire 9-pound body straight up the trunk of a tree. But legs alone aren't enough for a climb like that. So the kakapo uses something almost no other bird relies on this way: its beak. Watch a kakapo climb, and you'll see it bite into the bark above its head, grip with its hooked upper mandible, and literally pull its own body weight upward, the same way a rock climber uses a handhold. Its beak becomes a third leg, a grappling hook bolted to its face, letting it scale trees that, by every normal rule of bird anatomy, it should never be able to reach the top of. And it works. Kakapo have been recorded climbing trees over 60 feet tall, all the way up into the canopy, using nothing but legs and beak in total darkness. Because remember, this is a nocturnal bird doing all of this at night. But here's the problem nobody designs around. What goes up in this bird's case does not gently come back down. A flying parrot reaches a treetop, finishes feeding, and simply flies to the next tree or glides down in a smooth, controlled arc. The kakapo doesn't have that option. When it's done at the top of a tree, it has two choices: climb all the way back down the way it came, slow and exhausting, or jump. So it jumps. It spreads its short, stubby wings, not to fly because it physically cannot generate lift, but to slow the fall slightly. The same basic principle as a parachute. At a steep angle, dropping fast, wings out, it half glides, half crashes back down toward the forest floor. Researchers who study these birds describe it bluntly. With so little chest muscle and so much body weight, what the kakapo calls flying, everyone else would call a controlled crash landing. Flightlessness doesn't just shape how this bird moves. It shapes how it finds a mate, too. A normal parrot can fly miles to find a partner. A kakapo can't. So instead, males dig shallow bowl-shaped pits into hillsides, and at night, they sit inside them and inflate their chest like a balloon, producing a deep, booming sound that rolls through the valley like distant thunder. They do this for up to 8 hours a night, every night, for months at a time, hoping a female somewhere in the darkness hears it and walks toward the sound. It's essentially a parrot building its own subwoofer out of dirt because flying to find love was never an option. This is where the story turns from charming to tragic, because the same traits that made the kakapo perfectly built for its world are the exact same traits that nearly destroyed it the moment that world changed. Remember that freeze response? The one that worked so well against an eagle hunting by sight from the sky? It does absolutely nothing against a predator hunting by smell, on the ground, at night. And the kakapo has one more trait that made things worse. It carries a strong, sweet, almost honey-like scent, likely evolved so males and females could find each other in a dark, dense forest during mating season. For millions of years, that scent was a feature. It helped the species survive. Then, humans arrived. First Polynesian settlers, then Europeans, and with them came something New Zealand had never had in 80 million years. Ground-based mammal predators, rats, cats, stoats, ferrets, animals that hunt by scent at night on the ground, precisely the conditions the kakapo's entire body and behavior were never built to survive. Picture it from the stoat's perspective. A slow-moving, sweet-smelling, flightless bird that freezes the second it senses danger instead of running. It isn't a hunt. It's barely even a chase. A bird that smells like honey, freezes instead of fleeing, and can barely manage a controlled crash landing might as well have a sign on its back. The result was close to a full extinction event. A species that had survived on this landmass for tens of millions of years, through ice ages, through eruptions, through everything the planet could throw at it, was reduced to roughly 50 birds in just over a century, by animals introduced almost by accident. So what does a 90-year lifespan actually mean for an animal like this? It means everything moves on a different clock than almost any other species we study. A kakapo doesn't reach sexual maturity until somewhere around 5 years old. Females often don't breed until closer to 10. And even then, they don't breed every year, the way most birds do. Kakapo only breed when a specific native tree, the rimu, produces a massive crop of fruit, something that happens irregularly, sometimes only once every 2 to 5 years. No fruit crop, no breeding season. The entire reproductive strategy of the species is tied to a tree's unpredictable mood. That's the cost of the slow metabolism that let this bird live so long in the first place. The same biological idle speed that lets a kakapo survive for decades on low-quality food also means it reproduces at a pace closer to a tortoise than a typical bird. And when your population has already been crushed down to roughly 50 individuals, a reproduction rate that's slow becomes an emergency. Here's a detail almost nobody outside conservation science knows. Female kakapo can actually influence the sex of their own chicks, depending on how healthy and well-fed they are. A female in strong body condition tends to produce more male chicks. A female in weaker condition tends to produce more females. For years, conservationists trying to help the species by feeding females extra food accidentally made the problem worse. Well-fed females kept producing male-heavy broods in a species already short on females. Saving the kakapo required a strange kind of restraint. Feed them enough to breed, but not so much that the population tips even further out of balance. Then there's the genetics. Every kakapo alive today descends from that same handful of survivors from the 1990s. That means the entire species shares an unusually narrow genetic toolkit, which became terrifyingly clear in 2019 during what should have been a record-breaking, joyful breeding season. A single strain of fungal disease swept through one island colony and killed 9 birds in a matter of weeks, roughly 1 in every 10 kakapo alive at the time. Scientists later discovered the strain itself had unusually low genetic diversity, and the kakapo population's own lack of diversity may have left it with almost no natural defense. That's the real hurdle this species faces today, and it has nothing to do with predators anymore. It's outliving the very thing that made it special. A 90-year lifespan was a brilliant strategy in a world with no land predators and centuries to spare. In a world now crowded with introduced threats, shrinking habitat, and a genetic bottleneck the species can't simply evolve its way out of in a human lifetime, that same long, slow, patient biology has become a race against time it never chose to run. Scientists are now fighting back with tools evolution never had access to. In a world first, researchers have sequenced the complete genome of every single living kakapo. Every one of the roughly 200 birds left on Earth, individually mapped, gene by gene. No other species on the planet has ever had its entire surviving population genetically sequenced like this. The goal is simple but enormous. Figure out exactly which birds carry which disease risks, which pairings will produce the healthiest possible chicks, and how to manually engineer the genetic diversity that millions of years of isolation accidentally erased. And yet, the most recent numbers tell a different story than you might expect. As of this year, the wild population sits at roughly 235 known birds, every single one of them named and tracked. And this past breeding season was the biggest ever recorded. Over 100 chicks hatched in a single season, more than any year in the species' documented history. So the kakapo isn't just a strange evolutionary leftover from a vanished world. It's a species currently actively, slowly clawing its way back from the edge, one waddling, beak-climbing, crash-landing, impossibly long-lived bird at a time. Somewhere on an island most people will never visit, a parrot that has outlived empires, technologies, and entire generations of humans is still out there tonight. Climbing a tree it has no business reaching the top of, about to jump.